I'm also going to turn on good afternoon again, everybody, and welcome to our December Drupal for Gov webinar. The topic this month will be It's Time We Prioritize Web Sustainability, Building Low Carbon Websites. And our presenter today is Mike Gifford from CivicActions. So before we actually jump into things, I kind of want to share some information about Drupal for Gov. We are a community of open source advocates, and we love all things open source. Most of you all are familiar with who we are. But for those who don't, in addition to having this webinar that we have every third Thursday at 3 p.m., we also have the Drupal GovCon, which we didn't do last year, kind of COVID and finding space. And then previous years we had online, but we're hoping to get back to it for 2023. On occasion, we do the global training days, half training days. We're looking for space for that. So if you have an agency who has the capacity and the Wi-Fi, please reach out to us. And we also help organize the Gov Summit at the DrupalCon North America. So if you're interested in presenting or have space available to do a half day, please contact us. We're available via email, which you see on the screen, Slack, as well as Twitter. And as I said before, we are looking for space to host either a half day or the conference. And so what's important, or things to think or keep in mind, if you have like fast Wi-Fi, an auditorium that holds 150 to 200 people, classroom space, it's metro accessible, around the fall timeframe with 2 to 3 days availability, we would love to get in contact with you. So you can reach us at the Drupal for Gov plus host at Gmail or our Drupal for Gov email. Also, if you miss a webinar, we always upload these after the presentations to YouTube. And then I also place links and supporting documentation on our drupalforgov.us webinars website. And just to let you know, for the new year, our presentation will be on Developer to Manager, a Survival Guide by Kat Cole. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce Mike Gifford. He is a senior strategist and a thought leader at CivicActions. He was previously the founder and president of Open Concepts Consulting. He spearheaded accessibility improvements in Drupal since 2008, and he is a Drupal core accessibility maintainer since 2012. So welcome, Mike. I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's wonderful. First of all, definitely have been appreciative of Drupal GovCon and the work that's been going. I really enjoyed going in the past, and hopefully there'll be opportunities to go off and to go again in the future when a new person steps up and to support that. But I'm now going to go off and jump into the presentation. And I'm going to be looking at web sustainability. This is all that's been covered. The only thing that wasn't covered is the fact that my dog is right here, and she probably won't bark, but she's, I think that's, you're not seeing my dog, are you? No. This all worked last time I tried this. There's nothing quite like technology to go off and suddenly not work as planned. So I think I'm going to go off and scrap my plan of going off and organizing it that way. Sorry to change this on the fly. I'm going to share my screen and just do it the old-fashioned way. And no, it's still not quite working. So sorry about this. Cancel. It's always tricky when you try new technology and suddenly things don't work quite as well as they do in testing. So hopefully everyone can see my presentation now. No, you're still seeing the wrong screen. There we go. Okay, this will proceed now. Excellent. So here's my dog, but we won't have time to look at her because we'll have to move on to the next presentation. The next slide, rather. And so what is web sustainability? Think about web sustainability, or think about the internet and the vastness of the internet. It is essentially humanity's largest machine. And all of that machine requires it to be powered. It requires energy and resources to maintain. As we know, the technology that we're using, it becomes outdated pretty quickly, and so we're always looking to go off and to get new equipment. The old equipment is ending up in the trash. There's a huge demand on resources for this digital society, and that affects both the electricity, but also rare minerals, and even for water. So that's something that when there were droughts recently in Sacramento and also in England recently, a lot of the data centers had to go off and reduce their usage or shut down for the lack of water and the need to go off and distribute water amongst multiple different use cases. So this is affecting more than just electricity. And communication technology, based on Mozilla, a Mozilla study, communications tech will emit more carbon in 2025 than any country except China, India, and the US. So that's a huge jump in what we perceive as being, what is historically perceived as being a very green technology. So how do when we're thinking about the internet as suddenly being one of the world's largest emitters of CO2, that's something that we need to start reconsidering how this plays out in our policies and our frameworks. So how digital is digital for climate change? So it's essentially between 5 and 9% of electricity use that is consumed by information communications technology. At the moment, there's only about 27% of global electricity which comes from renewable sources. We also know that there's an exponential growth in this technology. We know that there is that the electricity demand is increasing, and it is growing at a pace of more than 2.1% per year. And digital also consumes a lot of rare resources and minerals, and e-waste is a huge problem. So that's something else to try and to be aware of. It's a significant issue that we really do need to address it. It does need to be a priority, and something that we need to be looking at as we're developing our websites, as we're looking at adoption of new digital transformation strategies. How are we going to make sure that the technology that we're implementing is actually not working against broader climate goals? So I wanted to break this down into a couple different parts. Part A, I think of as is sort of like the servers, the network, and the power. So, first question is not how many guys does it take to screw in a light bulb? It's how many servers does it take to run a website? And it can be as simple as one primary server, but there's always like a network of other servers that are required in order to run it. For many government websites, there's actually several computers that are involved, whether it's the database server, whether it's a cloud-based infrastructure that might have dozens of computers involved in actually implementing a single instance of it, or thousands even. If we think about the physical layer of the data centers, the networks, all the connections between our computers, all the devices that we use, the new and the old, the ones that are homes and offices, the ones we've used to surf the web, we're currently using to surf the web, but we've used historically, that are still sitting around that we haven't gotten rid of or have not been recycled. How is this chain of devices powered? So when you're looking at loading a web page, well, you have to make a request to the server, and so that's one chain of signals, packets that need to be transferred from one server to the other, often taking a wide path across the globe. And then how does that come back? And how is that chain of resources powered? Also, what happens with that infrastructure when it dies? Whether you're talking about a data center or you're talking about the computers within the data center, how is that managed? How are we trying to go off and push that information forward and structure that going ahead? So part B is loading the web pages. Thinking about looking at the size of the web pages is generally what we look at for this component of it. So from 2012 to 2022, the median page weight increased 221%. So back when I started building web pages in say in 1998, 1999. Web pages were much smaller. The average web page is now considerably larger than it was, and there's a lot of bloat that comes in. Sometimes it's coming from third-party libraries. Sometimes it's coming from the frameworks that we use. But it's a significant increase in size of page. And there's been pressure for more bandwidth, but that doesn't, as Kristen noted, it's a lot of bloat. And sustainability and performance are much more than page weight. We have to think about the intensity, the intensity of the page, the payload that's being delivered, and not just the data itself. So some processes are going to use more energy in terms of how they engage with the CPU of the client server. Some are going to take more interactions back and forth, and there's not going to be a single page load. There'll be maybe multiple page loads that happen as a user engages with the website. So there's a lot of different ways to think about page beyond just page weight. So yeah, lots of bloat, both in the third-party libraries and also in terms of our frameworks. And finally, images and video are a huge component of this. It's so easy to go off and to take a multi-megabyte image and just sort of upload that to your website. And we're not defaulting to uploading to modern more compressive web formats. So there are tools like WebP and AVIF that are much better at compressing high quality images and reducing them. But because it takes more time to go off and convert those, people are defaulting to uploading the large JPEGs that they've produced, or even not taking the time to reduce the size of the PNG files that they're using. So it's really an interesting challenge to try and look at reducing the number of images and trying to make sure that the ones we upload are as sustainable as possible. So using other people's people using computers, this is a whole other part of the process. How do we make sure that people are accomplishing their tasks as quickly as possible? The more efficient we make our websites, the less time people need to spend navigating them. So we need to make sure that the content is accessible. We need to make sure that the navigation is clear. We need to do the hard work of making the interface simple so that people can get what they're coming for and leave. So that's a really important piece of the having good user experience, making sure that you're setting up as much as you can for your users so that they don't have to sit and go back and forth and reload the page multiple times. That's something that does take a lot of energy. So our teams doing the hard work of making it simple is critical. We also believe very much in contributing back to these open source libraries. How do we make sure that we're able to use and extend the best practices or BET practices, as I put in the slide? How do we make sure that things that we're learning, those practices are things that are embedded into not just the project we're working on today, but the projects that all government websites are implementing. This is less of an issue for government websites, but another aspect of people using computers is just making sure that the business model itself isn't dependent on constant engagement. There's so many websites now that are very much based on the idea that we need to have eyeballs coming back to our web page on a daily, if not hourly basis, and that's something that is inherently destructive, both for human interaction as well as for trying to manage your low sustainability budget. We want to make sure that people are using the technology when it's appropriate and not elsewise. And just we had a question here and from Michael in terms of how can we convince stakeholders that decorative images aren't necessary and are an actual hindrance to our sustainability goals. I think part of this comes down to usability, and I think that the experience within the UK government, the way that they have implemented their sites is really a great best practice for other governments to follow. And if we can point to examples where there's a nice, clear, usable interface that does not have a lot of additional flourishes, and how that this can be a very good design aesthetic for government agencies. I think that that's if your stakeholders hate the UK government, hopefully there's another example. I'm not sure. It's whether they hate it or not, it's definitely seen as one of the most user-friendly websites out there, and it's an agency that spent the most time doing user research. So maybe it comes down to doing user research and trying to make sure that there is a real focus on understanding what users need. And most of the time, they don't want to have a website that they can hang on their wall. They want a website that allows them to quickly and easily accomplish what they've come for, and to allow them to focus on their tasks. So that might be one way to approach that. Hopefully that's helpful. So how much do .gov websites contribute to the climate change crisis? So thankfully, there's this great little website that doesn't address all federal government websites, but actually quite a few of them. And it's useful to think that there were, I did the screen capture yesterday from analytics.gsa.gov, I think is what it is. And there were 52 billion websites on websites that had that were using the official federal government analytics pages in the last 90 days. 52 billion web visits. That's quite a significant number of visits. And if you look at sort of any change that we can make to the design system or any common pages that are part of that, if we can affect a small change in how those pages are developed, well, that will scale 52 billion times within 30 days. So there are real opportunities for a reduction in the CO2, and to take that multiplication effect very seriously because of the number of the kind of traffic that government websites use. Yeah, so if we're looking at if all these websites were using the USWDS, and if there was a 1 kilobyte per page, you could potentially save 5.2 terabytes of data transfers within 3 months. This is just one potential sample of something that could be done to reduce the size of the downloads from government web pages. There's a number. I did want to go off and convert this into the amount of carbon, but there's a lot of different ways to estimate how much a gigabyte of data or a terabyte of data converts over into CO2 impacts. And partly that depends on what the source of that energy is. Where does it come from? How is that being transferred across the board? And certainly for those of us who are living in Eastern North America, dealing with US government websites, we can be pretty confident that much of that is being powered by coal, because of where data centers tend to go off and associate themselves closer to where the energy is the cheapest. So places where there's old dirty coal energy is something that you can often find more data centers around those spaces. But yeah, think about the multiplication effect of 52 billion visits to the code that we're developing and using across our websites. There's a great tool that uses Lighthouse. So Google Lighthouse is a wonderful tool to evaluate page speed, and page speed is actually a really good way to understand what I guess more of an overall understanding of the climate impact of a web page. Is more useful than the weight, because it is something that is takes into effect CSS and elements that can be potentially cached differently. It's a better way to evaluate how the web actually is being run, how efficient a web page is. And I've got 3 websites here for the White House, the USDS, and the transportation.gov website that I use this application called Lighthouse Parade on. This is an open source tool. And what it does is it allows you to crawl a domain and be able to evaluate the speed of each page, and gives you sort of a snapshot of how what is the performance speed of each page that it crawls. And so I have some graphs over here to show this. So the first one is by the White House, and you can see there's a range of performance from the lowest performing page, which was 3.2, which is actually the State of the Union website from 2022. Not great that the State of the Union webpage takes so long to load, but that's something that's another issue. And you can see there's a based on the number of images, based on the complexity of the page. There's a range of how these pages are how fast they load and how much data is on those pages. There's also with this is for looking at the USDS, and this is much better. There's 83% is the average for this particular for this site, for the 35 pages I scanned here. And I'm not sure why Steve Albert's page is so much slower than all the others, but it's something that's again, these are ways to go off and pick out the slower pages that are showing up in a crawl of websites. You're not necessarily only looking at the home page, but you're looking at a range of pages that a user might interact with. And finally, we've got the transportation.gov website, and their average score was just 41%. This is out of 100, just to make it clear that Google Lighthouse scores it out of 100. And this was the most disappointing of the 3 websites that we looked at from the U.S. government. And again, it's quite a distribution from the slowest speed, like the air consumer, getting only hitting a grade of 19 out of 100 that's really quite dismal. And not getting a page over 60 is again not a good sign, given that there's this is something that's been in existence for a long time. And oops, I wanted to compare this with what's with the UK government, and I am a big fan of the UK government, and I scanned over 1,500 pages from UK.gov, and almost all of them were at 85%. One of them was quite a lot higher, a couple were a little bit lower. The average was 86%. And just sort of looking at how well that is stacked. And part of, I think, the reason that there is so much a higher performance in this case is that the UK government doesn't use very many images. But they're also, they have a very structured way of presenting stuff through their content management system. So this is something to strive for the US government. Part of the other reasons that they're good is that they actually have they've made this something that is part of their sustainability goals. So they've outlined practices, and they've tried to make it something that it's a priority for the UK government to make their technology sustainable. This was something that got a little bit of a controversy last year after the COP26 summit in Edinburgh, where there were some evaluations of the website that was produced for the COP, and it wasn't as accessible as it should have been. But it was certainly something that was quite useful to go off and to see how how these kinds of policy initiatives can be implemented, and the kind of kickback that can happen if a government isn't able to go off and to do its due diligence around producing a climate-friendly website. And for people who are curious, the most recent COP27 event in Egypt, also the website there did not have particularly good ratings for its web sustainability, and so that did get a little bit of kickback on that space. But I think there's also a lot lower expectations for that COP and its ability to actually implement on the web sustainability target than the UK government. So what about Drupal? So Drupal runs over 1 million websites, and it's creating about 1.2% of the web pages globally. Drupal drives complicated websites for large governments, educations, and business organizations. Now, performance is difficult within Drupal. There's definitely lots of servers involved, lots of layers of caching, and there's lots of documentation and advice on how to go off and to improve Drupal's performance. It isn't always followed as closely as it should be, and because it does take extra effort to go off and to set up your website to be as performant as possible. Drupal can definitely provide some support for authors, and that's something that's being built. There's some efforts to support lazy loading and to support more image compression as part of core. But there's certainly more work that can be done to help improve the experience for authors going ahead. So Drupal cares. There's now a sustainability page. That's something that happened just shortly, like a couple months ago. We set up a sustainability page. There's also a sustainability group on Slack and a performance channel as well. Both of those are great places to go off and ask questions and to learn about what some of the best practices are and how we can reduce our environmental footprint for the websites that we're responsible for. You can also find issue queues in Drupal.org under sustainability and performance. There's a smaller set of issues under sustainability than there are performance. There's a relationship between the two, but performance is at this point a there's different reasons to go off and to categorize those issues between sustainability and performance, but they are definitely related issues. So some ideas about modules that you can look at to try and reduce to improve the performance of your pages and reduce the CO2 impact of your pages. The fences module is a great way to go off and to be more controlling over the output of the modules in core and to try and make sure that you're just outputting what you need to output. There's still definitely room for advanced CSS and JavaScript aggregation. There's opportunities to use a content delivery network like Akamai, so I wanted to go off and to highlight those modules. Also to highlight that there's using the purge module is useful if you are using a CDN, simply because there's times you need to be able to cache the page and make sure you're not looking at content that was cached within the CDN. So that's an important part of that. Lazy loading has some elements of being brought into core. I think there's still an image lazy loader module, and I'm still trying to figure out from the maintainers what the image lazy loader module does that core does not do. So that's something that may or may not be needed. But there's also ways of just trying to look at your system as a whole, and can you find ways to optimize your database, to profile your system, to see what are the pages that are taking the longest. And Optimize DB and Web Profiler are two modules that can be useful for looking at the performance of your pages. So another element is just sort of thinking about how do you try and make sure that if people can get the information they need without going to your website, that's a lot more efficient than actually forcing them to go to your website and access your information where you've stored it. And as we're seeing more uptake for Google Home and for Alexa, these are tools that are aggregating information, semantically organized information on websites, and making it available to users in a format that is convenient and useful for them. Google does this as well with the little snippets of text, and that is pulled from websites that often displays around the questions that you happen to ask, or searches that you do in Google. So often you can find out information from Google that you're looking for without ever having to visit the site to actually see the implementation. Finally, looking at images, there's Tiny PNG is a great tool that's a standalone website that you can use to squish your images and to compress them, but there's a module that's built right into Drupal that will help make that easier for your authors to manage. There's also a whole other a series of tools under the image optimize module that allows you to use either tiny PNG or resmush it, or even to go off and to change the image format on the fly, so that you're using something like AVIF or WebP, even if a user uploads a PNG or a JPEG. So these are some modules that can help make it easier to go off and to adopt a climate forward thinking perspective of for image optimization. So yeah, where possible, use a content delivery network. They're definitely very useful. Also, very keen on people looking at using shared resources. So if there's images and CSS files, JavaScript that's part of the that's commonly used across all government websites, if that can be loaded once and cached in a browser, it shouldn't have to be loaded for every domain you go to. I think there are still some people who have concerns around security and how that's set up in some cases, but I am confident that you can set up servers that will approve the other sources of images and CSS files. And the real big advantage of this is just making sure that if a user goes to a government website, they should be able to download the CSS, JavaScript, and core images from that one site and never have to load it again, even if they're going to a whole other department's website. So that's definitely something to aim for. I really encourage people to push for dark mode in your designs, and so the USWDS does not support dark mode. And there's lots of accessibility reasons why dark modes should be supported, but it actually does have an environmental impact as well. It does take less energy to use dark mode than it does to use a light background. And this also has an impact on battery life. So there's a lot of users who prefer using dark mode because they can run their computer for longer. But there's, again, I think there's enough reasons to go off and give people and the ability to select dark mode. It's supported by all the browsers and all of the operating systems out there. It's simply a matter of getting our design systems to officially support it and then to implement that. The more we can focus on keeping content simple and focus users on the task they've come to implement is the better we can be. There may be other ways to also think about optimizing the database. Are there ways that we can try to provide a better framework for the environment, so that the web infrastructure is properly powered in order to go off and quickly get the results that we need and not require the users to wait for the page to load. There's also tools like Redis and Memcached, which can also increase the load times on busy servers. So those are other tools to look at that will help deal with other forms of caching, in this case, code caching. I've said this before, but the most sustainable web page is one that the user never visits. How do we make sure that we are setting up our websites so that that a user doesn't need to actually visit them in order to get the information that we're trying to convey to them. There's a couple tools that are very useful to go off and to highlight here. One is EcoGrader. This was one of the first ones that was out there to try and help evaluate what the environmental impact of your website was. And this is done by Muddy Bytes, which is a firm out of Chicago. Then there was the website carbon.com calculator. This was built by the folks at Whole Grain Digital in London, and is again a very similar tool, but one that provides a page weight, and it's quite funny because it's both educational and funny because it has visuals that help you sort of compare the amount of CO2 produced by your web page to I think it's like, they have some funny comparisons, so it's worthwhile putting your URL within the website carbon.com to evaluate that. And finally, there's the Green Web Foundation, and the Green Web Foundation has a database of IP addresses and data centers, and it has a reasonably accurate list of data centers that are powered by green energy. And so you can quickly find out if your website is being powered by green energy. It's a bit complicated because some of the CDNs out there they may be calculating the IP address for a CDN versus the website or the web server that you're running. So you're going to have some knowledge of your web infrastructure to know how accurate that is. But it is a really good indication for most people about how the server that the services that they're using are powered, whether or not they're managed by renewable energy or not. And to know that this information is public and that this is something that is easy for people to identify. And the more and more people start looking to green solutions, the more important it would be to go off and see that these commonly easily accessible tools are ones that are showing your organization as being on the forefront of being responsible web service or website is I think quite important. There's opportunities to learn more. So one of the places is Climate Action Tech. There's both a website and a Slack channel that allows you to ask questions about that. So there's a range of different issues around climate action and technology. It's not specifically focused on the web technology, but certainly there's a lot of discussion around web technology and web infrastructure. There's also the Sustainable Web Manifesto, which is a great document outlining guidelines and best practices for building a sustainable website. There's also sustainablewebdesign.org. There's also a great many podcasts out there. Environment Variables is at looking at setting up a performance or web page page weight budget is also something that we recommend doing. So what do you want to have the page weight of your site? How do you want to go off and evaluate that? How do you try and measure that to make sure that you're within the range of your site? Also, I recommend using the open source tool that this Google this Lighthouse Parade from Cloud4, and trying to provide a site-wide view for your site. How do you make sure that we're providing that we're monitoring and making sure that our web pages are following best practices from Google at the very least. I think that there's also a lot of room to build sustainability into the procurement process. If you're buying web services, asking your providers to outline what their strategies and tactics are around sustainability is important. Trying to help you bringing sustainability into the procurement process helps demonstrate to vendors as well that this is something that's important to you and your team. We also recommend talking to your team about this, especially the authors. There's often authors are not going to necessarily be looped into what is an AVIF versus WebP. Like they're not going to know, they're not going to care. They want to upload the image and they want to make sure that it's there properly. So how do you try and take these more technical ideas and bring it into something that makes sense to them and makes it clear as to why workflows might be changing for them. We also recommend disabling unused modules, trimming unused code, and tracking your usage over time. What is the impact of these modules? How do you find ways to deliver as much as you can with as little as you can? So trying to be as efficient and performant as you're able to go off and be. Wanted to throw in this quote here, which some that can be applied to all sorts of useful things, but do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better, by Angelou. So there's a lot happening in the space of sustainable web development at this point. There's a lot that we can do, but we can start taking steps now to make it better, and we can start looking at what our current status is and finding ways to help make sure that our next page, our next website, our next image that we upload is following a better practice than we have in the past. And that's it for me. So I can be reached on email or Twitter or Mastodon or LinkedIn. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions that people have. I'm also happy to go off and to highlight the website carbon.com website if people are interested in seeing what that looks like, if there's a bit of time between questions. Does anyone want to raise a hand or type something in the chat?
I think Soli has raised his.
Okay, Soli, go right ahead.
Hi. So I just loved your presentation. Thank you so much. Super useful. I was just wondering what you thought of this the new, well, not so new now, but the artificial intelligence creation and appropriation of art. It just seems that it's now exploding, and I feel almost like this presentation is like we're sweeping at the beach, you know, trying to clean up after like this giant amount of content is ever expanding. And I understand the intent of this. Let's not keep on contributing.
Yeah.
But it's just like it's taking off, like it's about to take off even in a bigger way now. So I was just interested in what you thought about that.
I'm definitely very interested in what's happening with ChatGPT and with the evolution of stable diffusion and the open source AI models as well as the proprietary ones. Certainly things are changing very quickly, and one thing to keep in mind is that there's a huge amount of energy used in training these AI or machine learning interfaces, and there's a number of people that are looking at how do we try and make sure that when we're experimenting and implementing these new AIs, that we're not being careful about or that we are being careful about how energy intensive they are and what is the CO2 impact of that. I think it was the environment variables session that was actually talking about how it's possible to go off and build environment friendly server infrastructure, so that if you know that there's a data center that is being powered by if you wanted to have your processes powered entirely by renewable energy, you could actually move the data and the processing between data centers in order to go off and to produce the most environmentally friendly processing of those kinds of large data sets. And there's definitely, with wind and solar, there's times where it's more advantageous to be using computational power in some parts of the world than others. But aside from the environmental impact and I think there are definitely some advantages with trying to go off and to help AI help to review the work that we're doing and trying to make sure that there aren't opportunities for saving time. So I think that we will be able to see more opportunities for AI to be involved in auditing the work and trying to make sure that we're eliminating code that is not needed. Humans are very good at adding. We're pretty terrible as a species at subtracting. And that is something that we could actually use AI to go off and to look at, to say, well, is this module being used? Is this something that we want to be able to, that we can disable at this point or not? So that there are ways that we could use it to benefit sustainability. Even looking at things like maybe there's a possibility of using something like ChatGPT to be able to help people more quickly get the answers that they need, versus regularly Googling and trying to go off and to see if you can get an answer that seems to fit the mix by looking at the top 10 answers that come up in a Google search. That being said, ChatGPT, the OpenAI team has been very clear that this doesn't actually provide true answers. It's not the engine isn't about trying to go off and provide accurate answers. The real goal of the OpenAI and the ChatGPT is to produce believable answers. And so that's another challenge, is that we're not getting answers that are going to be more accurate. They're just going to be ones that sound more accurate, or they could be more accurate too, but they're not it's not necessarily the same thing. So as users, we're going to have to be much more aware of the text that comes out that we see, and the information that, because it's so much easier to produce information, but that information isn't necessarily accurate. How do we try and make sure that we're honing our senses even more to actually look for accurate information and to question what we read, because it is so much quicker and easier to go off and have stuff that is written out for us. Does that answer the question, Solene?
It totally answers the question, and thank you so much for that.
I mean, it's not like anyone really knows, except that there's a can of worms that has been opened.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna have to try and figure out how we manage that as a society, and it will be a big challenge for government, but it'll also be a big challenge for everyone living in a modern digital age.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions about sustainability best practices? I mean, one of the challenges for government websites is that it's something that we don't necessarily see as like looking at the customer experience executive order. Performance wasn't listed there as one of the things that was important for that customer experience, and I think that performance really should have been. The download speeds is something that the private sector know engenders trust, and ideally would be something that we would that other vendors would also be, or other website owner would also be thinking about how the page speed has an impact, but certainly the people who are building the websites for government agencies, whether it's inside or outside, you need to hear that the performance matters, and that this is a metric that's being evaluated, and there's certainly room to be tracking performance and to be setting goals around the number of government servers that are being hosted on renewable energy. That is stuff that is easily knowable and trackable if the correct infrastructure is set up, and it's having that type of a leaderboard is something that can really help people realize that they need to change their status quo infrastructure and up their game on performance and sustainability. So I can just quickly we can put a website into so can everyone see the website, carbon.com website? Oops, no, I'm not sharing my site right now. Let me share. We'll just do this quickly before the call ends. So any websites you want me to run in here? .gov, DOL, oops, sorry. All right, so you can definitely go through and load this on your own as well, but and it runs through and gives you senses of the other bits of information that are useful as it's calculating this. Oh, EPA.gov would be a great one as well. And the DSC, absolutely quite useful to go and to see that as well. There you go. So the DOL is 77% dirtier than the average web page tested. So that's not a good sign. And if we do The EPA, which would be another great one as well. Again, 59%. Like the EPA is almost 60% worse than other websites. That's not great. We've got one that's not federal, so we can do that one as well. Oops. Oops, that's not. There we go. So Minnesota's done some great accessibility work, and yay, cleaner than 72% of web pages tested. Nicely done, Minnesota. Okay. I think I got that right. I should know. Excellent. The DSC is 56% more accessible than Drupal Association. I just got to go off and what is it? Is it? I think that's it. Or no, it's association.drupal.org, isn't it? I think I messed that up. I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, D.O is certainly an easier one. Oh no. 1.91 grams of carbon produced for every time somebody loads the page. We're using bog standard energy. It's the equivalent weight of if we're looking at 1,000 people plus or minus, which Drupal gets considerably more, it's the equivalent of 1.53 sumo wrestlers, or as much CO2 as boiling 3,109 cups of tea. 246 billion bubbles. That's a lot of bubbles. 11 trees would absorb that in a year. And the amount of energy to drive an electric car for 3,000 kilometers. That's not great. Yeah, the camps probably also. Oops. Would be a problem. Yeah, so it's a fun way to go off and to look at different websites, and it is pretty bad that Department of Labor and Drupal.org have the same yes, basically the same equivalency in terms of bad CO2. Oh, and do we not get this? No, it didn't work. Anyways, thanks so much, everyone. This has been great, and lots more that we can do to go off and to make our web more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, thank you again for educating us. We don't often think about these things when we're building websites. So thank you.
No problem. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Wow.